The morning air tastes like rain and possibility, cool against my face as my sneakers pound the gravel path through Riverside Park. 6:47 a.m. The world still half asleep, wrapped in mist rising from the water beyond the trees. This is my time, the only hour of the day that belongs entirely to me, before the classroom fills with 25 first graders and their endless needs and questions. My breathing falls into rhythm, steady and familiar, and I let my mind drift toward lesson plans and grocery lists and the stack of essays waiting on my kitchen table. Then I hear it. A sound that does not belong in this peaceful dawn. A child crying. Not the frustrated wail of a tantrum, but something raw and terrified that makes my blood turn cold. I slow, scanning the path ahead, and there, near the playground equipment shrouded in morning shadow, I see them. A man in dark clothes gripping the arm of a small boy, dragging him toward a white van parked on the access road. The child fights, his small body twisting, and the crack of the man's hand across his face echoes through the empty park. I do not think. My body moves before my brain catches up, closing the distance between us in seconds. I scream something, I do not even know what, and the man's head snaps toward me. His eyes are flat and cold. Professional. That registers somewhere in the back of my mind even as I launch myself at him, clawing at his arm, trying to break his grip on the boy. He shoves me hard and I stumble but do not fall. The boy is sobbing, reaching toward me, and something fierce and primal ignites in my chest. This child needs help. The man reaches into his jacket and survival instinct screams at me. I grab the boy's hand and run, hauling him with me off the path and into the maze of equipment and structures. Behind us I hear cursing, heavy footsteps. The boy is fast despite his terror, keeping pace as we sprint toward the maintenance building at the park's edge. I pull him behind it, pressing us both against the concrete wall, my hand over his mouth to muffle his crying. My heart hammers so violently I think it might break through my ribs. We wait. Seconds stretch into hours. I hear the man searching, his boots crunching on gravel, his voice low as he speaks into a phone. The boy trembles against me, his small body racked with silent sobs. I stroke his hair, making shushing sounds, and finally look at him properly. He cannot be more than 5 years old, with dark curls and enormous brown eyes swimming with tears. His clothing is expensive. I register that immediately. The jacket is wool, tailored, something that costs more than my monthly rent. His shoes are leather, custom-fitted, and on his finger, incongruous and strange, he wears a gold ring with a symbol I do not recognize etched into its surface. Who puts a ring on a child this young? The searching sounds fade. Minutes pass. Silence falls over the park again, but it feels different now, charged with danger. The boy looks up at me and whispers one word. Thomas. His name is Thomas. I tell him mine, keeping my voice low and calm despite the adrenaline still screaming through my veins. We need to get to the police. I need to report this, get this child somewhere safe. I peek around the building. The van is gone. Relief floods through me for approximately 3 seconds before I see them. Black SUVs with tinted windows, 2 of them, pulling into the park from different entrances, moving with purpose, converging. Every instinct I possess starts screaming. This is wrong. All of this is wrong. Thomas sees the vehicles too, and makes a small sound of fear. I make a decision. I take his hand, and we run. My apartment is 12 blocks from the park, and we cover the distance in a blur of side streets and alleyways. Thomas's hand clutched in mine, both of us breathing hard. I keep checking behind us but see no pursuit, no black vehicles, nothing except morning commuters starting their day, oblivious to the terror clawing through my chest. My building is old and unremarkable, crammed between a laundromat and a bodega, exactly the kind of place nobody notices, and right now, that anonymity feels like salvation. I hustle Thomas up 3 flights of stairs and into my apartment, locking the door and engaging the chain before leaning against it, my legs suddenly unsteady. Thomas stands in the middle of my small living room, looking impossibly small and lost, tears tracking silently down his face, and my heart breaks for him even as my mind races through what I have just done. I did not take him to the police. I brought him here. Why did I bring him here? Because those SUVs felt wrong. Because the kidnapper felt professional. Because nothing about this situation fits the pattern of a normal abduction. I kneel in front of Thomas, keeping my voice soft and steady, even though I feel neither of those things. I tell him he is safe now, that I will help him, that everything will be okay, and I desperately hope I am not lying. He nods but does not speak, his eyes too old for his face, and I guide him to my couch, wrapping him in the throw blanket I keep there. My hands shake as I fill a glass with water and bring it to him along with the sleeve of cookies I was saving for movie night. He drinks but ignores the cookies, and I sit beside him, trying to project calm. I examine his clothes more carefully now. The jacket has no tags, none at all, as if someone removed them deliberately. The shirt underneath is the same, tagless, custom-made. His shoes are definitely bespoke, fitted leather that probably cost more than my car. And that ring. I take his small hand gently, looking at the gold band with its strange engraved symbol, something that looks like a family crest or coat of arms, intricate and deliberately obscure. Thomas pulls his hand back, curling it protectively against his chest. I ask him about his father, where he lives, how I can contact his family. Thomas's eyes go wide with something that looks like fear. He says his father will be angry, that he was not supposed to leave the house, that the guards will be in trouble. Guards. The word lands like a stone in my stomach. I reach for my phone, pulling up the emergency call screen, my thumb hovering over the numbers. Thomas sees what I am doing and erupts, lunging forward and grabbing my arm, his small face twisted with panic. He begs me not to call them, not to call anyone, his voice rising toward hysteria. No police, he repeats. No police. His father said never the police. I freeze, torn between protocol and the genuine terror in this child's eyes. I make a choice. I set the phone down and pull Thomas close, feeling him shake against me. I promise I will wait, that we will figure this out together, and he slowly calms, exhaustion finally overtaking fear. Within 20 minutes he is asleep against my shoulder, his breathing evening out, and I am left alone with my thoughts and the growing certainty that I have stepped into something far more dangerous than I understand. Across the city, in an estate surrounded by walls and cameras and armed men who would die for him without question, Alexander Thornhill stands in his son's empty bedroom and feels his entire world crack apart. The call came 9 minutes ago. Thomas is missing. His son is gone. Someone breached his security, walked onto his property, and took his child. The rage that fills him is cold and precise, the kind of fury that has built empires and destroyed families. He turns to face the 6 men standing at attention in the hallway, their faces pale, and speaks 4 words that seal their fates: find him or die. Thomas sleeps with the abandon of exhausted childhood, his small chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, his hand curled against his cheek, and I finally allow myself to move from his side, my body stiff from sitting still for so long. My laptop waits on my kitchen counter, the screen dark, and I flip it open with trembling fingers, the bright glow making me squint in the dim apartment. I search for missing children first, scrolling through pages of heartbreaking cases, each face a tragedy, but none of them are Thomas. I try different search terms, narrowing by age and location, expanding the radius, checking every database I can access, but there is nothing, not a single report, not one Amber Alert, not even a whisper about a missing boy. The silence feels wrong, fundamentally wrong, like a sound that should exist but does not, an absence that screams louder than presence. What kind of family does not report their child missing? What kind of situation makes a kidnapping invisible? I glance back at Thomas, at his expensive clothes and that strange ring glinting even in sleep, and ice spreads through my veins. This child belongs to someone powerful enough to keep his disappearance quiet, someone who operates outside normal channels, someone who does not call the police when crisis strikes. I turn back to the laptop, studying that ring more carefully now, taking a photo of it with my phone and running it through image searches. But the symbol is too unique or too obscure. Nothing matches, and frustration mingles with fear in my chest. My phone buzzes and I nearly jump out of my skin, Catherine's name flashing across the screen, and I stare at it for 3 rings before answering, forcing brightness into my voice that I absolutely do not feel. She asks about tonight, our standing Thursday dinner plans, and I lie smoothly, too smoothly, telling her I have a migraine and need to rest, hating myself for the deception, but unable to imagine explaining this impossible situation. Catherine accepts it with sympathy, telling me to feel better, and when I hang up, the weight of what I am doing settles over me like a physical thing. I am lying to my best friend. I am harboring a child without notifying authorities. I am making choices that could destroy my life, my career, everything I have built. But when I look at Thomas sleeping peacefully for the first time since I found him, I cannot regret it. Across the city, Alexander Thornhill stands in his security control room, surrounded by monitors and maps and men who fear him, his voice cold and precise as he issues orders that will mobilize every asset he controls. His people have swept Riverside Park with ruthless efficiency, documenting everything, photographing everything, collecting everything. They found blood on the playground equipment. Not much, but enough. They found signs of struggle near the maintenance building, disturbed gravel, a button torn from expensive clothing. They found tire tracks from the van and footprints from at least 2 people, one adult male and one smaller, lighter. And they found something else, something that changes everything. A witness, a jogger who saw a woman running with a child, heading east toward the residential blocks. The description is vague but useful. Brown hair, average height, wearing running clothes. Not much, but more than he had 10 minutes ago. Alexander studies the map, calculating distances and possibilities, and speaks into the silence. Someone helped his son. Someone intervened in the kidnapping and took Thomas somewhere, hid him, protected him, and he needs to find this person immediately, because if he can track her, then so can his enemies, and she becomes a target the moment Colburn realizes she exists. Robert approaches with a tablet, information already compiled, and Alexander reads it with the focus that has kept him alive in a world designed to kill men like him. The witness is being brought in for detailed questioning. Every security camera in a 20-block radius is being pulled and analyzed. Every contact, every informant, every eye he owns is searching. He will find his son. He will find the woman who has him. And then he will decide if she is savior or threat. Thomas wakes screaming 3 hours after falling asleep, his small body jackknifing upright on the couch, eyes wide and unseeing, trapped in whatever horror his mind is replaying. I am beside him instantly, pulling him close, murmuring reassurances I hope are not lies, feeling his heart hammer against his ribs like something trying to escape. He clings to me with desperate strength, his fingers digging into my arms, and gradually the screaming dissolves into broken sobs that hurt worse somehow, more real, more devastating. I rock him gently, the way my mother used to comfort me during thunderstorms, and slowly he returns to himself, his breathing evening out, his grip loosening fractionally. He whispers that he is sorry, that he did not mean to be loud, and the apology from this traumatized child breaks something in my chest. I tell him he has nothing to apologize for, that he is safe, that I will keep him safe, promises I have no business making but cannot stop myself from offering. Thomas pulls back enough to look at me, his face blotchy and wet, and for the first time since I found him, he begins to talk freely, words tumbling out in a rush as if a dam has broken. He tells me about his father, Alexander, about their big house with the tall walls and the men who stand at all the doors. He describes a life I can barely imagine, isolated and protected and lonely, a childhood lived behind barriers both physical and invisible. He tells me his mother is gone, that she went to sleep one day and never woke up. And the matter-of-fact way he says it suggests he does not fully understand death yet, just absence. He says his father is probably very angry right now, that he was not supposed to leave the grounds, that the guards will be in trouble for letting the bad man take him. I listen with growing dread as the picture comes together, puzzle pieces forming an image I do not want to see. This child comes from serious wealth, the kind that requires armed guards and complete anonymity. This child comes from serious danger, the kind where kidnapping is a real and present threat. Alexander. The name circles in my mind, uncommon enough to be distinctive, and I file it away knowing I will search for it the moment Thomas sleeps again. My refrigerator is nearly empty, just yogurt and wilted salad and condiments, nothing suitable for a frightened child who needs comfort food and normalcy. I realize I need to venture out, need to get supplies, need to think beyond the next 10 minutes for the first time since this started. Thomas has calmed enough to watch television, and I set him up with cartoons and strict instructions to stay inside, to hide in the bedroom closet if anyone knocks, to not answer the door for any reason. He nods solemnly, too obedient, too accustomed to threat, and guilt twists through me as I grab my purse and keys. The grocery store is 4 blocks away, a quick trip I have made 1,000 times, but today everything feels different. Charged with potential danger, every stranger a possible threat. I move through the aisles quickly, grabbing basics and things children like, chicken nuggets and juice boxes and cookies. My cart filling with items that feel surreal given the circumstances. At the checkout, I notice him, a man in a dark jacket standing near the magazines, not shopping, not reading, just standing, and his eyes flick toward me before sliding away too deliberately. Paranoia or reality? I cannot tell anymore. My skin prickles with awareness as I pay and bag my groceries, moving faster than necessary, my heart rate climbing. Outside the store, I risk a glance back and he is there in the doorway watching me, and terror floods cold through my veins. I walk quickly toward home, not running because running would confirm I know, would show my hand, but my legs want to sprint. The man follows at a distance, maintaining the gap between us, professional and patient, and I know with sick certainty that I am being tracked. Across the city, Alexander Thornhill receives the report he has been waiting for, Robert's voice steady as he delivers the information that changes everything. A woman matching the witness description was captured on security footage 6 blocks from the park, moving quickly with a child, her face partially visible in 3 separate frames. They ran her image through facial recognition, cross-referenced with databases both legal and otherwise, and within 90 minutes they had a name. Eleanor Hastings. Age 29. Elementary school teacher at Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary. No criminal record, no outstanding warrants, no connections to any organization or family he knows. Nobody important, nobody connected, nobody who should have any reason to take his son. Alexander studies her photograph on the tablet screen, memorizing features that are pleasant but unremarkable: brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, serious eyes, a face that belongs to someone who lives a quiet, law-abiding life. Why did she take Thomas? The question burns through him as he reads her background file, looking for angles and motivations, finding nothing that makes sense. She lives alone in a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood. She has taught 2nd grade for 6 years. She volunteers at a literacy program on weekends. Her parents are dead, her social circle is small, her financial situation is stable if unimpressive. She is exactly what she appears to be, ordinary and unremarkable, which makes her actions extraordinary and deeply suspicious. People like Eleanor Hastings do not steal children from parks. They call the police. They follow rules. Unless she is working for someone, unless this is more complicated than it appears, unless she is bait in a trap he has not yet identified. Robert asks if he should bring her in, and Alexander considers it, weighing options and outcomes, but something holds him back. Some instinct that has kept him alive when smarter men have died. If she has Thomas, and Thomas is unharmed, then she is not working for Colborne. Colborne would have sent proof of capture by now, a finger or photograph, something to demonstrate power and issue demands. The silence suggests something else, something he does not yet understand. He tells Robert to locate her but not approach, to surveil and report, to find out where she is and what she is doing, and whether his son is with her. And then Alexander will decide what comes next. I make it back to my building in half the time it should take, my breath coming fast and sharp, grocery bags cutting circulation to my fingers. And I take the stairs instead of the elevator because elevators are traps, metal boxes with no escape, and burst onto my floor with my heart trying to break through my ribs. My apartment door is slightly ajar. The sight stops me cold in the hallway, bags slipping from nerveless fingers, oranges rolling across worn carpet. Because I locked that door, I am certain I locked it. I checked it twice before leaving, and terror floods through me so completely, I cannot move for 3 seconds that feel like hours. Thomas. His name is a scream in my mind, and it breaks the paralysis, sends me forward, pushing the door open with my shoulder, scanning for threats, for intruders, for the bad men he described. But the apartment appears empty, silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and my own ragged breathing. I move toward the bedroom closet, where I told him to hide, praying to a God I have not spoken to since my parents died, and when I open the closet door, he is there, wedged into the corner behind my winter coats, his eyes huge and terrified, and relief nearly buckles my knees. I pull him out gently, checking him for injuries with shaking hands, asking if anyone came inside, if anyone hurt him, and he shakes his head but points toward the kitchen with one trembling finger. The note sits on my counter, white paper stark against the old laminate, and I approach it the way I would approach a snake, slowly and with the certainty that it will strike. The words are printed in plain black font, no signature, no decoration, just a message that turns my blood to ice water. We know you have something that belongs to Alexander Thornhill. Await contact. I read it 4 times, each pass making the reality more concrete and more terrifying. And I understand with absolute clarity that I am in over my head, drowning in depths I cannot navigate, involved in something that will get me killed. Thomas sees my face and begins to cry. Not the loud sobbing from earlier, but quiet tears that hurt worse, the kind that come from a child who has learned that adults cannot always protect him, that safety is an illusion, and danger is patient. I kneel in front of him and pull him close, feeling his small body shake, and I make another promise I have no business making, telling him I will keep him safe, that no one will hurt him, that I will figure this out. Lies and truth mix together until I cannot tell which is which. My mind races through options like shuffling cards, each one worse than the last. I could call the police, but that note implies people who operate outside the law, people who will find me before any investigation begins. I could run, but where would I go with no money, and no plan, and a traumatized child who will slow me down? I could try to contact this Alexander Thornhill myself, but I have no idea how to reach a man whose name appears nowhere in any search, who exists in shadows and rumors. Thomas pulls back enough to look at me and asks in a voice so small I almost cannot hear it if the bad men are coming back. And I tell him no, with more confidence than I feel, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. This child who has become my responsibility through a choice I made in a park that feels like years ago instead of hours. Across the city, in an office that overlooks territory he controls through violence and strategy, Alexander Thornhill makes a decision that Robert questions immediately, his lieutenant's voice sharp with concern that borders on insubordination. Alexander wants to visit Eleanor Hastings himself, tonight, wants to look this woman in the eyes and determine if she is savior or threat, ally or enemy, innocent or player in a game he has not yet identified. Robert argues against it with valid points about security and exposure and risk, listing reasons why Alexander should send others instead. But Alexander cuts him off with a look that has ended discussions and lives. This is his son, Thomas. The only thing in his world that matters more than power or territory or survival. If this woman has him, if she saved him, if she is protecting him, then Alexander needs to know why, needs to understand her motivations before making the next move. And if she is working for Colborne, if this is somehow a trap, then Alexander wants to be the one who looks into her eyes as she dies. Robert recognizes the finality in his boss's voice and stops arguing, shifting instead to logistics and backup plans, arranging security that will be invisible but comprehensive, mapping escape routes and fallback positions. Alexander listens with half his attention while the other half focuses on the photograph still displayed on his tablet, Eleanor Hastings with her unremarkable face and her extraordinary actions. This woman who has disrupted everything by choosing to intervene when any sane person would have walked away. Night falls outside my apartment windows, and I have packed a bag with what little I can carry, spare clothes and toiletries, and the small amount of cash I keep in my sock drawer, preparing to run even though I have nowhere to go, and no plan beyond getting Thomas somewhere safer than here. The knock comes at 8 in the evening, not the doorbell, but a knock. 3 measured strikes against the door that freeze my blood because there is something controlled in that sound, patient and certain. The knock of someone who knows I am inside and will wait as long as necessary. Thomas looks up from the floor where he has been coloring with the crayons I found in my desk, and his expression shifts from wariness to something else. Something that looks like recognition mixed with hope, and my heart begins to hammer, because that look tells me he knows who is on the other side of that door. I consider the fire escape, actually take 2 steps toward my bedroom window, but Thomas is already moving toward the door with a child's directness, and I intercept him gently, kneeling to whisper that he needs to let me check first, that he needs to stay quiet, even as part of me screams that if his father has found us, then running is pointless because men with resources like his do not leave loose ends. I approach the door with my pulse roaring in my ears, and leave the chain attached as I open it 3 inches, peering through the gap into the hallway, and the man standing there steals every thought from my mind. Alexander Thornhill. I know without introduction, without confirmation, the same way I would know a predator in the wild by instinct alone. Power radiates from him like heat, contained but undeniable, and he wears a suit that probably costs more than I make in 6 months, charcoal gray tailored to perfection, his dark hair slightly disheveled, as if he has been running his hands through it. His face is all hard angles and sharp edges, handsome in a way that speaks of old money and older violence, but it is his eyes that hold me captive, dark and cold and calculating as they meet mine through the narrow opening. He does not demand entry, does not threaten, simply asks in a voice barely above a whisper if his son is inside, and I hear everything beneath those words, the desperation and fear and barely contained fury of a father who has spent hours not knowing if his child is alive. Thomas makes the decision for me, calling out from behind me, and I see Alexander Thornhill crumble, just for a second, his expression breaking open with relief, so profound it transforms him into someone almost human before control slams back into place. I make a choice in that instant, one I will question later, but cannot second-guess now, and I close the door enough to slide the chain free and then open it fully. Thomas runs past me, and Alexander drops to his knees to catch him, pulling his son against his chest with both arms wrapped around the small body. And I watch this dangerous man bury his face in his child's hair and shake with silent emotion. Watch him murmur words too quiet for me to hear. Watch him transform into exactly what he is, a father who thought he had lost everything. His eyes open and find mine over Thomas's head, And I see the question there burning cold and bright. Why did I take him? What do I want? What is my angle? I have no answer that will satisfy him, no explanation that makes sense even to myself. But something in my face must communicate truth because his expression shifts fractionally, confusion mixing with the suspicion. Alexander holds Thomas for a long moment that feels suspended outside time, his hands moving over his son with the careful precision of someone checking for damage, inspecting small arms and legs while Thomas babbles in the rapid-fire way of frightened children finally feeling safe, his words tumbling over each other as he tells his father about the bad man who grabbed him and the nice lady who fought him off, and how she let him color and gave him juice and promised nobody would hurt him. Alexander's eyes meet mine over Thomas's dark head, and I see the question burning there, stark and demanding. And I understand that whatever I say next will determine whether I walk away from this or disappear in ways that make the evening news for a day before being forgotten. He wants to know why. Why I took his son. Why I ran. Why I kept Thomas instead of calling authorities. The answer feels impossibly simple and utterly inadequate, but I give it anyway because I have never been good at lying and cannot start now when those dark eyes are dissecting me with surgical focus. A child needed help, I tell him, my voice steadier than I feel. That is all. I saw a man trying to take him, and I reacted. I would have done the same for any child. Alexander processes this in silence, his expression unreadable, and I watch him war with the concept that someone might act without ulterior motive, without angle or agenda, simply because it was right. His radio crackles and he speaks into it quietly, words I do not fully catch but understand from context: sweep the building, secure the perimeter, check for surveillance. Within minutes I hear movement in the hallway, footsteps too controlled to be my neighbors, and I realize his men are moving through my building like ghosts, turning my home into a fortress I did not request and cannot refuse. Robert enters without knocking, and I flinch instinctively at the sudden appearance of another dangerous man in my small space, this one broader than Alexander, and with eyes that hold no warmth at all, only assessment and threat. Alexander notices my reaction, sees how I step back unconsciously, putting distance between myself and his lieutenant, and something shifts in his expression. He tells Robert to secure the perimeter from outside, his tone carrying dismissal that brooks no argument, and Robert leaves after one long look at me that promises consequences if I prove to be a threat. Alone with Alexander and Thomas again, the apartment feels smaller, the air thicker, and Alexander sets his son down gently before turning his full attention to me. He asks me to explain everything from the beginning, and I do, starting with my morning run and ending with the note on my counter, leaving nothing out because I sense that omission will be treated as deception. He listens without interruption, his focus absolute, and I feel examined under that gaze, every word weighed for truth or fabrication. When I finish, silence stretches between us for 3 heartbeats before he speaks, and what he says turns my temporary fear into something cold and permanent. I am in danger now, he tells me with certainty that allows no comfort. James Colborne orchestrated the kidnapping. Colborne is his rival, his enemy, a man who operates without conscience or restraint. Colborne knows someone interfered with the kidnapping. Colborne will find me. The note proves it. I am already on his radar, already marked as either asset or target. And in Colborne's world, those categories both end the same way. Dead. I refuse his protection immediately, the words coming out sharper than intended, because I need to reclaim some control over a situation that has spun so far beyond my understanding that I cannot find solid ground anywhere. I tell him I did what anyone would do, what any decent person should do, and now that Thomas is safe with his father, I need to return to my normal life, my classroom and my students, and my small, quiet apartment where the most dangerous thing I face is a broken lock on the mailbox. Alexander listens to my speech with an expression that shifts from surprise to something harder, colder, and when I finish, he informs me in a voice like iron that my normal life ended the moment I stepped into his world, the moment I put my hands on his son and drew the attention of men who do not forgive interference and do not leave witnesses. He tells me about Colborne with clinical precision, painting a picture of a man who has built his empire on fear and brutality, who once skinned a rival alive for stealing a shipment and left the body displayed as a warning, who will view my intervention as either opportunity or insult and will respond accordingly. Colborne will find me, Alexander says with absolute certainty. He will take me to a location his men control, and he will hurt me in ways designed to extract every piece of information I possess about Thomas, about the kidnapping, about Alexander's security. And when Colborne has wrung me dry of useful intelligence, he will kill me slowly to send Alexander a message about the cost of interference. Or he will skip the interrogation entirely and simply leave my body somewhere public. Another casualty in a war I did not know existed until 36 hours ago. I argue because accepting his words means accepting that I have lost everything, that the life I built with careful intention and modest dreams has been burned down by a single act of conscience. But even as I protest, I remember the note on my counter, the man following me at the store, the way my apartment door stood ajar, and I see the truth in Alexander's dark eyes. He is not trying to frighten me into compliance. He is telling me the reality of a world that operates by rules I have never had to learn. Thomas tugs at my hand, and I look down to find him watching me with those enormous eyes, and he asks in his small voice if I will come with them, if I will stay where it is safe, and the trust in his expression breaks something inside me. This child has already lost his mother. He was nearly stolen by monsters. And now he is asking me, a stranger who happened to be in the right place at the right moment, to stay. I agree for one day, maybe two, just until the immediate danger passes, and Alexander can neutralize the threat. And I watch something flicker across his face too quickly to identify before his expression smooths back to control. He does not correct my timeline or tell me that I am catastrophically underestimating how long it takes to eliminate a man like Colborne. He simply nods and tells Thomas to get his jacket while issuing quiet instructions into his radio. I realize only later that Alexander knew from that moment exactly how this would unfold, that he understood I was not leaving in one day or two or possibly ever, because Colborne does not forget, and Alexander does not leave his people unprotected. And somehow in the span of 36 hours, I have become his people, whether I intended it or not. The drive to the estate takes 40 minutes through streets that grow progressively quieter and more expensive, the city giving way to gated communities, and then finally to a private road flanked by walls that seem designed more for a military installation than a home. And when the gates open after Alexander speaks quietly into his phone, I see the full scope of the fortress he has built around his life. And I understand with crystalline clarity that this man does not simply have money, but the kind of wealth that warps reality around it, that creates its own gravitational field. The house appears as we round a curve in the drive, all stone and glass and architectural lines that suggest both beauty and impregnability. Security cameras tracking our approach, while men in dark suits speak into radios from positions that offer clear sightlines to all approaches. Thomas has fallen asleep against my shoulder during the drive, his small body finally surrendering to exhaustion, and I hold him carefully as Alexander opens my door and reaches to take his son. But Thomas makes a small sound of protest and clings tighter to me even in sleep, and I see something flicker across Alexander's face before he nods and gestures for me to follow. Inside the house, I am overwhelmed by the scale of everything. Ceilings that soar 2 stories high and marble floors that echo our footsteps and artwork that I recognize from textbooks, hanging casually on walls as though impressionist masters are appropriate hallway decoration. Alexander leads me through corridors that seem to multiply, past rooms whose purposes I cannot begin to guess, until we reach a staircase that curves upward with the kind of grace that suggests craftsmen spent months on the banister alone. And the guest suite he shows me to exists on a scale larger than my entire apartment, all cream and gold with furniture that looks antique and probably costs more than I make in a year. An attached bathroom done in marble with a shower that could fit 6 people, and a bathtub that qualifies as a small pool. I stand in the center of this space holding Thomas and try to reconcile the life I left 2 hours ago with this reality I have stepped into, but the gulf feels too wide to bridge. Alexander moves to take his son to put him in bed, but Thomas wakes enough to panic when he realizes we are separating, his hands fisting in my shirt as he makes desperate sounds that break my heart. And I tell Alexander softly that Thomas can stay with me tonight if that helps him feel safe, expecting argument or territorial male response, but instead seeing only relief cross his face before he nods. Alexander speaks quietly into his radio again, and I hear him assigning guards to my door, 2 men on rotation throughout the night, and the casual way he discusses my protection as though I am now an asset requiring security makes the situation feel terrifyingly real. I ask him directly who he is, what exactly I have stepped into, because I deserve truth, even if it damns me. Alexander studies me for a long moment before making what I recognize as a choice, the same choice I made when I opened my door to him hours ago. He tells me he runs the Thornhill organization, and the way he says organization makes the meaning clear without requiring criminal or mafia or any of the words that exist to describe men who operate outside law and inside power. I should be terrified, and I am, my heart hammering against my ribs as I process that I am standing in the home of someone who orders violence as casually as other men order coffee. But I am also watching how gently he smooths Thomas's hair back from his forehead, how carefully he checks that the suite has everything I might need, and the contradiction between the man who commands criminals and the father who loves his son so desperately confuses every certainty I thought I possessed about how the world divides into good and evil. Morning arrives with sunlight filtering through curtains that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and I wake disoriented in the massive bed with Thomas curled against my side, his small hand fisted in my shirt as though afraid I might disappear if he loosens his grip even in sleep. I ease out carefully and find clothing laid out on the chair near the bathroom, soft leggings and a cashmere sweater in exactly my size, and I do not want to think about how Alexander obtained my measurements or had someone shop for me in the handful of hours since we arrived. Thomas wakes as I emerge from the bathroom and immediately reaches for me, calling me Ellie in his sleepy voice, the nickname settling into place as naturally as though we have known each other for years instead of days. And I feel something dangerous blooming in my chest that I recognize as attachment to this child who has already survived too much loss. We venture downstairs together, his hand tight in mine, and a woman in her 50s introduces herself as Maria the housekeeper and leads us to a breakfast room where food has been laid out with the kind of abundance that speaks to wealth beyond my comprehension. Thomas eats slowly while I try not to stare at my surroundings, at the way even the casual breakfast dishes look like they belong in a museum. And then he asks if we can go outside to the gardens, and I agree because keeping him comfortable feels like the only useful thing I can do in this situation. The gardens stretch for what looks like acres, manicured and beautiful with paths winding between flower beds that someone clearly tends with obsessive care. And Thomas shows me his favorite spots with growing enthusiasm. A stone fountain with carved dolphins and a small pond with actual swans gliding across the surface. I see guards stationed at intervals, trying to be unobtrusive but failing, their presence a constant reminder that this beautiful place is also a fortress. We are examining a rosebush when I feel the weight of observation and turn to find Alexander watching from a terrace above, his expression unreadable at this distance, and something in my stomach tightens at the sight of him in daylight, at the way his suit fits his frame, and the way he holds himself with the absolute confidence of a man who has never had to question his right to occupy space. He disappears back inside, and I tell myself the disappointment I feel is ridiculous, that I do not want his attention, but Thomas has seen his father and calls out, waving enthusiastically. And when Alexander reappears and walks down to join us, I see something in his face soften as he approaches his son. Thomas chatters about the swans and the roses and asks his father if Ellie can stay forever. The question so innocent and so complicated that I freeze. But Alexander simply tells his son that I will stay as long as I want to stay, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that makes my breath catch. The rest of the morning passes in a strange domesticity that feels both wrong and oddly right. Thomas playing while Alexander sits on a bench nearby, working on his phone, and I try to process how my life has become this surreal tableau. I watch Alexander when he is not looking, cataloging the way he moves with predatory grace, and the way his attention never fully leaves his son, even when he is conducting whatever business requires his focus. And I realize with uncomfortable clarity that I am fascinated by this man in ways that have nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the contradiction he represents. Days pass in a rhythm I never anticipated. Mornings with Thomas in the gardens, teaching him simple math through counting flower petals, and afternoons where Alexander appears at unexpected moments to join us for lunch, or to listen to his son read from picture books. And through it all, I feel the careful distance Alexander and I maintain, despite the forced proximity of living in the same house. Despite the way I catch him watching me when he thinks I'm focused on Thomas, and despite the way my breath catches when he enters a room. I see him with his son during these stolen hours, patient when Thomas struggles with a word, and playful in ways that seem to surprise even him, tickling his son until the boy shrieks with laughter. And each time I witness Alexander's gentleness with Thomas, something in my chest tightens with an emotion I refuse to name. He sees me too. I know he does. Watches me guide Thomas through his fear with a calm I do not always feel. Sees me read the same bedtime story 3 nights in a row because it comforts the boy. And sometimes I catch an expression on Alexander's face that looks like wonder mixed with something darker that might be longing. Alexander works constantly from his office down the hall from the library, where I spend hours with Thomas, managing his empire through phone calls I can hear through the heavy door, his voice cold and commanding in ways that remind me exactly who he is and what he does. Yet when he emerges for dinner each evening, he sheds that persona like a coat and becomes simply Thomas's father again. I know I should maintain boundaries, should remember this is temporary, and that I come from a world where men do not command criminal organizations and children do not need armed guards. But I find myself watching for Alexander throughout the day, my pulse quickening when I hear his footsteps in the corridor, and disappointment settling in my stomach when he passes without stopping. On the 4th day, I bring him coffee in his office, a simple gesture born from noticing he drinks it black and takes it throughout the day, and when I knock and enter with the cup, he looks up from his desk with surprise that shifts into something warmer. He stands as I approach, manners ingrained despite the violence he commands, and when I hand him the cup, our fingers brush and the air between us charges with electricity that makes my skin feel too tight. We stand frozen for a moment that stretches too long, his eyes on mine with an intensity that steals my breath, and I see him start to speak, but the moment shatters as Robert enters without knocking, his face grim with urgency. Alexander's entire body shifts into alert readiness, and he tells me to leave, but Robert is already speaking about Colborne and movements against them and an imminent attack. And I watch Alexander transform from the man who was looking at me with heat into the cold strategist who commands armies. He gives orders rapid fire into his phone, while Robert pulls up security feeds on the computer, and then Alexander is moving toward me with purpose, his hand closing around my arm as he tells me I need to get to the safe room with Thomas immediately. I see something in his eyes I have not seen before, something that looks like fear, and the sight of this powerful man afraid sends ice through my veins as I realize the danger is no longer theoretical, but immediate and deadly. The attack comes at midnight with an explosion that shakes the entire estate, the sound like the world splitting open, and I am asleep in the chair beside Thomas's bed when the blast throws me to the floor. my ears ringing and my heart seizing with terror as alarms shriek through the building and Thomas wakes screaming. I grab him from the bed and run into the hallway where Maria appears from nowhere, her face pale but composed as she grabs my arm and pulls us toward a door I have never noticed before, concealed in the paneling, and we rush downstairs that descend into darkness. While above us, I hear gunfire, sharp cracks that make my stomach turn to ice, as I realize people are dying up there, that Alexander is up there facing whatever force has breached his fortress. The safe room is exactly what it sounds like. Concrete walls thick enough to survive anything, and a heavy steel door that Maria seals behind us with a wheel lock that looks like it belongs on a submarine. And Thomas clings to me sobbing while I hold him and try to control my own shaking, try to be the calm presence he needs, even though terror claws at my chest with razored fingers. Maria checks monitors that show security feeds from around the estate, and I see muzzle flashes in the darkness, see figures moving with tactical precision, see too many attackers pouring through breached walls. And I make Thomas look away because no child should see this violence, even if it is his reality. Hours pass in that underground room, each minute stretched into eternity, while Thomas cries for his father, and I murmur reassurances I do not believe, promising Alexander will come for us, even as I imagine him lying dead somewhere above. And the not knowing is worse than any concrete fear, because my mind supplies 1,000 horrible possibilities. The gunfire continues in bursts, and then slowly, gradually, silence falls, heavy and complete. And I do not know if that silence means victory or annihilation. Do not know if Alexander survived, or if Colborne's men are even now searching for this safe room to finish what they started. Maria will not open the door despite Thomas's pleas, following whatever protocol Alexander established, and we sit in that concrete tomb while my imagination runs wild with images of Alexander bleeding out, Alexander executed, Alexander gone, and the intensity of my fear for him shocks me because somewhere in these days I have come to care about this dangerous man more than I ever intended. Thomas finally exhausts himself and falls into fitful sleep against my shoulder, and I sit frozen, listening to nothing, waiting for something, my entire body tensed for whatever comes next. The sound of the wheel lock turning makes my heart stop, makes every muscle in my body coil to fight or flee, even though there is nowhere to go, and the door swings open and Alexander stands there, blood on his white shirt and a cut above his eye, but alive, so completely alive that relief floods through me with such force my vision blurs. Thomas wakes and runs to his father crying, and Alexander drops to his knees to catch his son, his arms wrapping around Thomas with desperate strength while his eyes find mine across the room, and something passes between us in that look, something raw and unguarded that feels like a promise or a question, or maybe both. He stands with Thomas still clinging to him and crosses to me, and I realize I am shaking so hard my teeth chatter. Shock finally breaking through now that the immediate danger has passed, and Alexander reaches for me with his free hand, his palm warm and solid against my arm, steadying me when my knees threaten to give out. His hand slides down to grip mine, and he does not let go, his fingers lacing through mine with an intimacy that feels more significant than it should, and I see something in his face that looks like the same relief I feel, as though my survival mattered to him the way his survival mattered to me. He tells me quietly that Colborne's men breached the outer defenses, but his security held at the critical points, that casualties were minimal on his side and total for the attackers. And I should be horrified by the clinical way he discusses death, but all I can think is that he is alive, and Thomas is safe, and we survived. But then his expression hardens, and he tells me what I already suspected, that this was not the end but an opening move, that Colborne will not stop now that he has committed to open war, and I see the weight of that knowledge settle on him like a physical burden as he holds his son in my hand and contemplates the violence still to come. Morning comes gray and cold, revealing damage that makes my stomach clench when I follow Alexander through the estate grounds after Thomas falls back asleep, the east wall breached with rubble scattered across manicured lawns, and bullet holes stitching patterns across the stone facade, and windows blown out on the second floor where I know Alexander's office is located. He walks through the destruction with his jaw set and his eyes calculating, surveying his damaged fortress while his men work to clear debris and repair defenses. And I see the moment he makes his decision, because his entire body shifts into something harder and more dangerous than anything I have witnessed before. He turns to me and tells me flatly that this ends now, that he will finish Colborne permanently, and I understand immediately what he means, because there is no ambiguity in his tone, no room for misinterpretation. Violence. Death. War waged with absolute commitment to annihilation. I should be horrified because the man I am coming to care for is calmly planning murder, is preparing to destroy another human being with the same cold precision he applies to everything, but when I open my mouth to protest, I think of Thomas crying in that safe room. Think of this child traumatized again by violence meant for his father. Think of how close we came to losing everything last night. Part of me is horrified, the part that still remembers being a woman whose biggest concern was lesson plans and parent-teacher conferences. But that part grows smaller by the hour as this new reality reshapes me into someone I barely recognize. I cannot find it in myself to argue against what Alexander plans, because Colborne chose this path when he tried to steal a child, when he brought war to a home where a 5-year-old sleeps. Alexander watches my face as though reading my thoughts, perhaps expecting condemnation or fear. But whatever he sees there makes him nod once before turning back to Robert, who approaches with reports and tactical assessments. I hear them discuss strategy in terms that sound like military operations, hear Alexander issue orders that will mobilize his entire organization for what comes next. But before he fully commits to planning, he stops and tells Robert to arrange transport for Eleanor and Thomas to the secondary location within the hour. I start to protest that I should leave entirely, that I should remove myself from this dangerous equation, but Alexander cuts me off with a look that silences me before telling me in a tone that allows no argument that I am safer with him than anywhere else now. Colborne has my face from whatever surveillance he accessed, has my name from whatever sources he commands, has my address which is now certainly compromised, and the flatness in Alexander's voice when he lists these facts tells me he blames himself for my exposure. He tells me Colborne will use me to hurt him if given the chance, that I became a target the moment I saved Thomas, that there is no going back to my small apartment and my normal life, because that life no longer exists for me. I see guilt in his eyes when he says this, see him carrying the weight of having pulled me into his world and endangered me by proximity. And something in my chest aches at the sight of this powerful man shouldering blame for my choices. I want to tell him I do not regret saving his son, that I would make the same choice again, knowing what I know now. But Thomas calls for me from inside, and the moment passes as Alexander turns away to continue preparations for the war he is about to wage. The safe house is nothing like the estate, smaller and more functional, stripped of luxury in favor of pure security, with reinforced walls and minimal windows that make the space feel like a bunker. And by the time Thomas falls asleep in the bedroom down the hall, I am exhausted in ways that have nothing to do with lack of rest, and everything to do with the constant tension of living in a state of siege. Alexander remains in the main room with me, and for the first time since that night he appeared at my apartment door, we are truly alone without his son as buffer or distraction, and the silence between us feels heavy with all the things we have not said, all the moments we have carefully avoided. I sit on the plain sofa and he stands by the window checking his phone, attending to the machinery of war he has set in motion. And finally I ask the question that has burned in my mind since I understood who he really is. Ask him how he lives with the violence, how he carries the weight of the things he does. He turns from the window and studies me for a long moment before crossing to sit in the chair across from me, close enough that I can see the exhaustion in his face that he hides from everyone else, and he tells me he inherited the organization at 23 when his father was killed, tells me about choices made in grief and anger that became patterns he could not break, about territory that must be held and people who depend on him for protection and livelihood, about consequences that ripple outward from every decision. His voice is quiet and factored, clinical almost, but I hear the cost underneath. Hear the pieces of himself he has sacrificed to become what his world required. And I understand suddenly that he is as trapped as I am, just in a cage he has worn so long he no longer notices the bars. I ask about Thomas's mother because I see pain flash across his face whenever his son mentions her, and for a moment I think he will not answer. But then he tells me her name was Sophia, that she died in a car accident 2 years ago, and something in the way he says accident makes me hear the doubt, the question of whether it was truly chance or another move in the endless chess game of his life. He does not elaborate and I do not push, but I see the guilt he carries for not protecting her. The same guilt I saw when he told me I had become a target. He shifts the conversation then, asking me why I teach, what made me choose a profession that pays so little and demands so much. And I tell him about wanting to make a difference in small ways, about believing that shaping young minds matters even if the impact cannot be measured in wealth or power. He leans forward, elbows on his knees, his eyes intense on mine, and tells me I made the biggest difference possible by saving his son, that Thomas would be dead, or worse, if not for my intervention. And the gratitude in his voice is raw and unguarded. Our faces are close now, close enough that I can see gold flecks in his dark eyes, can feel the heat of him across the small space between us, and the pull I have been fighting for days becomes undeniable, magnetic, a force that makes my breath catch and my heart race. He reaches out slowly as though giving me time to pull away, his hand coming to rest against my cheek, his thumb brushing my jaw, and I see desire in his face matched by conflict, want warring with restraint. Then he pulls back abruptly, standing and putting distance between us, his jaw tight as he tells me I am from a different world, that I deserve safety and normalcy and all the things his life can never offer, that he cannot taint me further than he already has. And I hear him trying to be noble even as everything in me protests the space he has created. Alexander leaves the safe house before dawn, and I know without being told that he is moving against Colborne, that the careful planning I have watched him conduct through encrypted calls and terse meetings with Robert is now transitioning into action. And the knowledge sits heavy in my chest even as I force myself to maintain normalcy for Thomas, who wakes and asks where his father went. I tell him Alexander had work to do and distract him with breakfast, then settle us at the small table where I pull out the notebooks and supplies Alexander had delivered, determined to give this child some structure and routine despite the chaos surrounding us. Thomas resists at first, but gradually engages as I guide him through simple math problems and reading exercises, and I watch him flourish under the attention, his bright mind hungry for stimulation and challenge. And something shifts in me as I realize how much I have come to love this boy in the days we have spent together. The thought terrifies me more than the violence or the danger, because love means attachment, and attachment means pain when this temporary situation ends, when I return to my small life and leave them behind. But even as I tell myself this is temporary, I feel the lie in it, feel how deeply Thomas has embedded himself in my heart. Alexander returns mid-afternoon, and I see immediately that something has changed. Tension in his shoulders released, danger in his eyes banked into something almost like satisfaction. And when Thomas runs to him, Alexander lifts him easily, but his gaze finds mine over his son's head and holds. And I understand without words that he has won, that Colborne is no longer a threat. Thomas chatters about the lessons we completed, and Alexander listens with half his attention while the rest remains focused on me. And after he puts Thomas down for a nap, he finds me in the small kitchen where I am washing dishes with shaking hands because the relief I feel is almost painful in its intensity. He tells me quietly that it is finished, that Colborne is dead and his organization scattered, and I should ask how or feel horror at the clinical way he delivers this information. But instead I only nod, because I understand the cost of mercy in his world would be measured in more attacks, more danger, more children crying in safe rooms. Then he tells me something that makes my blood run cold. My apartment burned 2 days ago, a fire that gutted the entire building, and the way he says it tells me this was not accident, but retaliation. Colborne's remaining men lashing out before Alexander eliminated them. Everything I owned is gone. My books and photos and clothes, and the small accumulation of a life lived simply, all of it reduced to ash. And the violation of it makes my throat tight, even as I recognize that things can be replaced, and I cannot. Alexander watches my face, and I see restrained fury there, guilt etched into the lines around his mouth, and he tells me he failed to protect me, that he should have anticipated Colborne would strike at anything connected to him. I see him then, not as the all-powerful crime lord who commands empires, but as a man carrying impossible weight, shouldering blame for every consequence that ripples from his existence, and something in me breaks open at the sight of his pain. I step closer and reach up to touch his face, my palm against his jaw, feeling the tension there, and he freezes under my hand as though shocked by the gentleness of the gesture. I tell him I chose to stay, chose to help Thomas, chose all of this with my eyes open, and he is not responsible for my choices or their consequences. His hand comes up to cover mine, holding it against his face, his eyes searching mine for something I do not understand, and then he leans down and kisses me with a hunger that steals my breath, his mouth claiming mine with none of the restraint he showed before, and I kiss him back with equal desperation, pouring into it all the fear and relief and want I have carried for days. The news reaches us at the safe house 3 days after Alexander left to finish what Colborne started, delivered by Robert, whose usually impassive face shows something almost like satisfaction when he tells us that James Colborne is dead and his organization has been absorbed or scattered. The threat eliminated so completely that no retaliation will come, and I watch Alexander receive this information with a single nod, as though the ending of a human life is merely another task completed on an endless list. Thomas does not understand the significance, but he feels the shift in atmosphere, the way tension drains from the adults around him, and he asks if we can go home now, and the question hangs in the air because I do not know which home he means, or if I am included in that we. Alexander makes arrangements for our return to the estate, and the days that follow feel strange and untethered, danger gone but nothing settled, and I catch myself waiting for the next crisis, while knowing that the only crisis left is the question of what happens now. My apartment is gone, my possessions ash, my old life quite literally burned away. But I have savings and friends, and I can rebuild, can find a new place, and return to teaching, and pretend that none of this happened, except I know I cannot pretend away Thomas, who has wound himself so tightly around my heart that the thought of leaving him makes my chest ache. Alexander watches me with an expression I cannot read, distant and careful, and I understand that he is waiting for me to make the choice he will not ask me to make, because he believes he has no right to ask anything of me after dragging me into his world of violence and consequence. I pack my single bag on a gray morning while Thomas is occupied with Robert in another part of the estate, and the action feels both necessary and wrong, survival instinct warring with the pull to stay in this place that has become more home in weeks than my apartment ever was in years. Thomas finds me as I am zipping the bag, and his face crumbles with understanding, tears immediate and desperate as he begs me not to go, promises he will be good, asks what he did wrong, and I kneel to hold him while my own tears fall because he did nothing wrong. Everything about him is perfect, but I do not know how to explain that I am afraid of staying, afraid of wanting things I have no right to want. Alexander appears in the doorway and I see him take in the scene with eyes that reveal nothing, his face carved from stone, and he does not speak or move to stop me, just watches while his son clings to me and sobs, and something in his silence breaks me more completely than words could. I look at this man who has shown me passion and danger and protection, who kisses me like I am precious and kills to keep his family safe, who carries the weight of an empire with shoulders that sometimes shake under the burden, and I look at this boy who has claimed my heart so thoroughly that I cannot imagine mornings without his laughter, or nights without tucking him in. And I think about my small, safe life, waiting for me in the ruins of my apartment building. Think about rebuilding alone, and returning to routines that suddenly feel empty. I stand and walk to my bag, and Alexander's expression does not change, but something in his eyes dims. Acceptance of an ending he expected, and I reach down and slowly, deliberately unpack the bag, pulling out the few clothes and setting them back in the dresser while Thomas watches with confused hope. Alexander's carefully controlled mask cracks, and something raw and vulnerable floods his face as he understands what I am doing, what I am choosing, and I turn to face him and tell him I am terrified, because this world is not mine, and I do not know if I can do this, do not know if I am strong enough or brave enough or foolish enough to build a life in the shadows he occupies. He crosses the room in 3 strides and cups my face in his hands and tells me I am the bravest person he has ever met, that I ran toward danger to save a stranger's child and have faced everything his world has thrown at me without breaking. And I counter that bravery and stupidity look remarkably similar from certain angles. His mouth quirks in something almost like a smile, rare and transforming, and Thomas launches himself at both of us with a cry of joy that makes us laugh even as Alexander pulls us both close, his arms around us solid and sure, and I feel the rightness of this moment settle into my bones despite all the logical reasons I should run. Eleanor knows her life has transformed irrevocably in ways she cannot undo or escape, knows she has chosen danger over safety and complexity over simplicity, chosen them with full awareness of the cost. And for the first time since that morning run in the park, when she saw a child in danger and did not hesitate, she feels completely certain of something. She is exactly where she belongs.